More of America's family farms are going bankrupt.
The number of American farmers struggling to stay afloat is on the rise.
The headlines concerning ag-related bankruptcies are on the rise. New data now showing that recent economic pressures is leading to many farmers declaring Chapter 12 bankruptcy.
The death of the family farm is not a new phenomenon. One could argue that family farming in the United States started to die with more government intervention, starting with the New Deal era policies that were implemented to combat the economic downturn of the Great Depression. However, the reduction of small family farms really ramped up in the 1970s with the rise of corporate farming, commonly referred to as factory farming. Government policies created tax advantages that favored large-scale production. This weakened smaller, family-owned operations. Technological advancements during that time also played a key role with developments in transportation, refrigeration, and mechanization, and biotechnology. This laid the groundwork for much larger industrialized farming operations. With new tax laws being implemented, corporate tax rates were reduced while individual tax rates were increased. This led to a 140% increase in factory farms between 1969 and 1978. Today, the vast majority of our food is produced by these factory farms. 99.96% of our chicken, 99.8% of our turkey, 100% of farmed fish, 75% of our beef, 98.3% of our egg-laying hens, and 98.6% of our pork. To understand how things changed during the Nixon administration in the 1970s, you must first understand how things were for farmers under the policies enacted by Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal program.
FDR forges a recovery program for the country. He calls it the New Deal.
A New Deal implies a new order of things, designed to benefit the great mass of our farmers, workers, and businessmen.
Next, FDR focuses national attention on the plight of the nation's farmers. In Iowa, a farmer says, hundreds of farms in this state have been foreclosed. If they keep it up, somebody around here is going to be lynched.
I ask the Congress for measures to increase the purchasing power of our farmers and to relieve the pressure of farm mortgages. Unprecedented conditions call for the trial of new means to rescue agriculture.
Imagine for one moment, being a farmer in the 1930s during the Depression. The Dust Bowl is choking your crops. Prices are so low you can't make a living, and your family's survival feels uncertain. Then, out of Washington, a bold set of programs arrive, promising hope, but also stirring controversy. This was the New Deal, and it changed American farming forever. One of the most famous programs was the Agricultural Adjustment Act. The government actually paid farmers to grow less, and in some cases, they even destroyed crops and livestock to shrink supply and drive up prices. It worked. Farm incomes nearly doubled between 1933 and 1936, but it also caused outrage. Because after all, how do you tell hungry families that food is being plowed under? Then came the Farm Security Administration, or the FSA. This agency provided loans, training, and guidance to struggling farmers. What was their goal? To help small family farms survive the storm. But in practice, many of the biggest benefits went to the large landowners, leaving sharecroppers and tenants pushed aside, often forced off the land altogether. Another game changer was the Rural Electrification Administration, or the REA. For the first time, electricity lit up rural America. Imagine going from kerosene lamps to electric lights, from hand-pumped water to electric pumps. It completely transformed farming and daily life.
In 1935, REA is born. 90% of all American farms without light or power. The cities are lighted, the country still in the dark. Lights up, 1936, 26 REA systems, 7,500 farm families like Bill Parkinson's get light. 1937, lights up. There are 122 systems now, power and light for 43,000 farm families. Lights up for Mississippi and Ohio. Lights up north, south, east, west. 1939, 548 systems, 435,000 families and other users, and many more soon to come on the lines. Lights up, 600 systems operating in early 1940, spreading their wires over 45 states. Well over 500,000 farms, schools, churches, stores, and rural industrial plants getting electric service for the first time. 300,000 more expected to come on these lines, and new lines going up almost everywhere at the rate of 500 miles a day.
And then there was the Soil Conservation Service, or the SCS, born in the middle of the Dust Bowl. This program taught farmers how to save their soil, using crop rotation, contour plowing, and shelter belts to stop the winds from carrying the land away. Without it, the Dust Bowl's devastation could have been even worse.
Bennett swiftly gathered his dream team, a core group of engineers, biologists, economists, soil surveyors, and technicians. He set forth how business would be conducted. They would work with nature and not against it. They would assess the needs on each piece of land and make recommendations based on what they found. There was no one-size-fits-all approach. Often, several conservation activities working together as a conservation system would be necessary. They would consider that land's place within the entire watershed. Bennett pushed his team to get out from behind the desk. They would go on the farmer's land and walk with him side by side. Together, they would decide what should be done to conserve soil and water and help ensure healthy production. Success could only be realized by combining scientific principles with practicality. It was as much of an art as it was a science.
So what was the result of all these programs? On the one hand, farmers saw incomes rise, electricity spread across the countryside, and new conservation practices take root. On the other hand, countless small farmers and sharecroppers lost everything, displaced by a system that often favored the wealthy. And even with all this help, many families on the Great Plains still packed up and moved west searching for work and stability. The New Deal didn't solve every problem, but what it did do is it reshaped the relationship between farmers and the federal government. From subsidies to conservation programs, its legacy is still alive in today's farm policies. The 1930s proved one thing. In time of crisis, farming isn't just about crops and livestock, it's about survival, policy, and the balance between people and power. Alright, so let's fast forward to the 1970s. Enter President Nixon's Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Rusty Butz. If the New Deal brought the government into farming, Butz brought something else: industrialization. His motto? Get big or get out, and he meant it. Butz dismantled the price supports that once kept farming stable. No more paying farmers to cut back. Instead, he wanted crops planted fence row to fence row, every acre, every season, no holding back. He pushed an export-driven vision, famously striking a massive grain deal with the Soviet Union in 1972. The U.S. would feed the world, but at what cost? By encouraging nonstop production, Butz tilted the scales toward agribusiness and corporate farming. Small, family-owned farms couldn't keep up. Many were swallowed whole or forced to sell out. What remained was the foundation of modern factory farming: bigger, more industrial, less personal. So from the New Deal's subsidies to Butz's get big or get out philosophy, one thing is clear: when government steps into agriculture, the little guy often gets left behind. The question we're left with today is this: was the trade-off worth it? Higher production, bigger farms, global markets, at the cost of the family farmer. By 1987, rural America was in crisis. Farm auctions weren't rare, they were routine. Families who had worked the land for generations were losing everything. The 1980s farm crisis became one of the darkest chapters in U.S. agricultural history. Remember Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Rusty Butz?
1973, President Nixon's Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Butz, responded by calling upon American farmers to plant fence row to fence row. And he told them to get big or get out.
Yeah, well, this caused farmers to borrow heavily, encouraged by high grain prices. And banks handed out loans freely, so farmers expanded, buying land, new equipment, and taking on huge debts. But then, the bubble burst. By the early 80s, interest rates skyrocketed, grain exports collapsed, and land values, once seen as the safest investment, plummeted by nearly 60% in some areas. Farmers suddenly owed more than their farms were worth. And no one knows exactly how many farms were foreclosed on, but the estimates are around 250,000 farms went out of business. 1987 marked the peak of the crisis with 5,788 bankruptcies filed. Foreclosures swept across the Midwest, wiping out small family farms at an alarming rate. Auctioneers sold tractors, barns, and even kitchen tables. The stress was crushing. Rural communities faced not just economic collapse, but also a heartbreaking wave of bankruptcies, divorces, and even farmer suicides.
Karen Heidman and her children faced the devastation that suicide brings to a family. Her first husband, Daniel Cutler, couldn't take the stress of the deteriorating economic conditions.
The children and I returned home from school on April 2nd, and Dan was not home, but we weren't alarmed because he had said that he was going to go to Monona County to visit family. But when he didn't return for dinner or all that night, then we were really scared, and I notified his family. They spent all night looking for him. I was on the phone with his psychiatrist several times that night. I told his friends the next morning, and they notified authorities, and by that afternoon, the BCI had found his body in an abandoned farmstead north of Sioux City. I personally think maybe that was symbolic. Also, an abandoned farmstead and abandoned dreams. He had a note in his shirt pocket that indicated where a suicide note could be found. And the opening statement of the suicide note was, "The farm killed me."
Under mounting pressure and growing public outcry, the government was compelled to take action to address the escalating farm crisis.
The plight of so many of our farmers has been a major concern of this administration and of responsible members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. The level of concern, however, was much higher than the level of agreement on how best to deal with the problem. It's taken extraordinary hard work and cooperation, not to mention the tenacity of a mule, to maneuver these bills through Congress. The two pieces of legislation being signed into law today represent divergent approaches, but on balance, they're a step forward for American agriculture. They underscore the commitment of the legislative and executive branches to make things better for America's farmers. Yet we must recognize, even while signing these bills, that there are no quick fixes. The Food Security Act of 1985 is a comprehensive bill that improves our existing farm programs. It gives the Secretary of Agriculture the flexibility needed to maintain farm price supports at levels consistent with market realities. Unrealistic price supports put many farmers out of the running. This bill includes laudatory conservation measures, provisions for the training of food stamp recipients, and other positive features. The second bill being signed today is the Farm Credit Amendment Act of 1985. This law enables the farm credit system to pool its considerable resources in a self-help effort. It establishes a stronger and more complete regulatory oversight system, and it authorizes a backstop system of federal assistance, although we believe that it will never be necessary.
While not specifically legislation, Chapter 12 bankruptcy was created during the farming crisis of the 1980s. It was to allow financially distressed family farmers with regular annual income to reorganize their finances and repay their debts while continuing their operations. Key features of Chapter 12 bankruptcy are as follows. Preventing liquidation. Chapter 12's primary purpose is to help family farmers avoid liquidation of their assets, such as farmland and equipment. This enables them to stay in business and preserve their way of life. Accommodating seasonal income. Unlike other bankruptcy chapters, Chapter 12 is tailored to the unique economic realities of farming. It allows for a repayment schedule that accommodates seasonal or fluctuating income rather than requiring equal monthly payments. Repayment plans. The debtor proposes a reorganization plan to the court which outlines how they will repay all or part of their debts over a period of 3 to 5 years. Chapter 12 bankruptcy also offers the cram-down provision. A key feature of Chapter 12 is the cram-down provision, which allows a debtor to reduce the principal balance of a secured debt to the current market value of that collateral. The remaining debt is usually classified as unsecured and can often be discharged. And Chapter 12 bankruptcies are usually simpler and cheaper than Chapter 11 bankruptcies. For family farmers, Chapter 12 is more practical and affordable than a Chapter 11, which is typically for a larger business and is more expensive and complex.
In the past, our nation's farmers have had to contend with not only with the usual God-given variables, such as the weather, but with other uncertainties and hardships that were man-made right here in Washington. Many of America's farmers are still suffering from the aftershocks of the runaway inflation of the 70s. As inflation pushed up the price of land, farmers were too often encouraged to overextend themselves in debt. The U.S. share of world grain trade is rising from 31% in 85-86 to 36% in 86-87 and to an expected 43% in 87-88. Surplus stocks are being reduced, farm production expenses are down, prices are up, and farm income is at a record high. Meanwhile, land prices are stabilizing, and by the end of 1988, farm debt is expected to have dropped 35% from its peak. Now, that doesn't paint a completely rosy picture for agriculture, however. There are still pockets of financial stress and high debt and low income growth in many foreign importing countries, combined with global agricultural protectionism still adding to farmers' woes. Well, today's signing of the Farm Credit Act should help alleviate some of those woes. The act ensures that the farm credit system will continue as a principal source of private credit to America's farmers, while at the same time implements many needed reforms to the system to ensure its long-term viability.
The farm crisis of the 1980s didn't just change who owned the land, it changed farming itself. As land values decreased, financially stable farmers or corporations could acquire the failed family farms. This increased the size and scale of surviving farming operations, but it also contributed to the decline of small, independent family farms. And just like in the 30s and again in the 70s, it was failed government policy that led to small farmers being pushed out while corporate farms continued to grow even larger. In 1987, the heartland cracked. The pain felt by these farmers as they lost everything was immense. These once proud men and women were forced to leave their homes and enter a future that, for them, was unfamiliar and uncertain. For those who lived it, these memories continue to linger.
It's a time I won't forget. I felt those feelings of being a failing.
So, you may have thought I was giving you a history lesson, and maybe I was. But the thing about history is that it often repeats itself.
Farm bankruptcies.
Bankruptcies.
Farmers are filing for bankruptcy.
Farmers filing for bankruptcy
Shows that farm bankruptcies are outpacing the last several years.
On a national level, we've already beat out 2024's annual bankruptcies.
Loy's report shows that 15 farms have filed Chapter 12 bankruptcies in the first quarter of 2025. To put that in perspective, there were 16 Chapter 12 bankruptcies total last year. Farm bankruptcies have become half of Jonesboro bankruptcy attorney Joel Hargis's cases.
I have filed more Chapter 12s in the last 6 months than I have in any full year.
Filing Chapter 12 bankruptcies gives qualifying farmers a more flexible repayment structure and allows them to continue farming. But that's only one kind of bankruptcy. More extreme Chapter 7 bankruptcies are those in which debtors must sell off assets, like farms and farm equipment.
I try to steer farmers away from Chapter 7s. If we can fit them into a Chapter 13, great, because it'll help protect the home. It'll protect the vehicles that are needed for the household.
It's unknown how many farmers filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy this year, but one that Channel 7 spoke with believes that it may be more than those filing Chapter 12s, not to mention those filing Chapter 11 or 13. Hargis says despite the odds, many of his farmer clients don't want to give up.
It's what they know. It's family land. It's their blood. You might as well cut off an arm than to sell their pasture or sell their cropland.
Severe weather this spring, tariffs, inflation, and an unfavorable global market and declining commodity prices have all combined to make this a devastating year for Arkansas farmers, for whom input costs are high but returns are so low they have no chance of breaking even. Not helping matters is the fact that the creation of a new farm bill by Congress is 2 years overdue. The existing and outdated bill, which shapes America's agricultural policies, has a subsidy safety net for farmers, but because of inflation, it's not saving anyone anymore.
If something doesn't happen, then I think that we're watching the death of the family farm, the death of the family farm.
The death of the family farm.
I think that we're hearing the death knells. I think that these big farming conglomerates, these big corporate farming operations, they're what's going to take over if Congress does not do something to protect our family farm.